but we're interested in your ideas as well, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. What you see on the slide, if you have the webinar up on your screen as well, are some deadlines or suspenses that are upcoming that may be of interest to people that are associated with SAME posts and resilience. The first is the resilience streamer. Well, first is the agenda, I'm sorry. The agenda for today's presentation. So we're going to talk about the resilience streamers and the JETSI call for papers. Then we have Mr. Tyrone Brumfield, or Ty, is going to be talking about the National Disaster Recovery Framework. And this is a part of the larger resilience discussion that the SAME committee is taking on as part of its perspective on how posts may look at their resilience mission. And it's more than perhaps what some of us look at in terms of from an engineering perspective, but what we do in terms of preparation, response, and then also recovery operations. And the NDRF really gets into the response component of that. And Ty will talk more about it. There'll be some discussion on that. Then we're going to follow up with more what have other posts done. And John Inyart will be talking about the San Antonio Post, what they did in 2017 for their streamer requirements for the SAME streamer. And then we'll talk a bit about the 2025 strategic plan. And as some of you may know, one of the 4 goals for the society is resilience. And the Resilience Committee has some input into that goal. And we'd be interested in your input, so and feedback on our ideas of how that goal could be shaped to better reflect what the society is attempting to influence, and how the posts can provide input to that, and how the society can assist the posts in achieving what they want to see moving forward. And then we'll have some closing remarks. Next slide, please. Okay, so talking about some suspenses, the 2018 streamer suspense is for 31 January. I think most streamer points of contact and posts know that. The forms for filling out the streamer requirements haven't changed since last year. They're available on the SAME website at the web link that's indicated. And most posts that submitted last year did reasonably well. The committee takes a broad view, doesn't mean it takes an easy view, but it does take a broad view of what is admissible, everything from individual response types of things that an engineer or a design professional might look at as a resilience activity associated with a building or a piece of infrastructure, to response types of activities that Ty will be talking about, to recovery operations, which are on the farther end of the spectrum of the larger resilience definition that the Presidential Policy Directive 8 or 21 talks about. And then we look at all of these as being part of the larger resilience continuum of activities that the nation takes a look at. And we could talk more about that at the end of today's discussion. The other thing that's coming up even shorter time frame is the Joint Engineering Training Conference. That will be held in early part of May, but the call for papers is due on the 10th of December. I learned today that there may be an extension, but the deadline is the 10th of December, and you can see the focus areas listed there on the slide, with the last one being the one of probably interest to the people on the line, being resilience and national security. And we're very much interested in anything that has to do with a resilience theme. A lot of the resilience themes last year had to do with information technology or cyber or control systems, but we're also interested in resilience that has to do with other types of infrastructure. Could be water infrastructure, could be energy infrastructure, it could be physical building infrastructure, it could be associated with climate impacts. Any of these would be the types of discussions that we're trying to promote as we look forward. In particular, we're looking at how the communities that a post is located in, whether it's associated with a military installation or it's associated with a civilian community that falls under a FEMA regional jurisdiction, and how that is responding in a resilient way to look into future threats, natural or man-made. That's also an important part of resilience as we look forward in how we prepare for our citizenry to be postured to respond and cope with a disaster into the future. And that is being flexible and resilient, or being resilient. So anyway, the JETC is 7 to 9 May. Please take note of that. That's about 3 weeks earlier than it's been for the last several years. Next slide, please. With that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to our first speaker for the day. Tom Brumfield is a Corps of Engineer employee, but he's on detail with the Federal Emergency Management Agency. In that role, he's the liaison officer to FEMA, where he serves as the RSF for, as you can see, for the National the Recovery Support Function National Coordinator. And the Corps of Engineers is the ESF 3 component of the National Disaster Recovery Framework. And to explain what all of those acronyms are and how they feed into the larger component, I think I'll turn it over to the expert. So with that, Ty, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, sir, and good afternoon to everybody on the line. Go to your next slide, please. What I want to do is I want to try to explain to you guys, and I'll show you just the wiring diagrams and how we all laid out across the Corps of Engineers and also across the interagency, the federal family, and all of the primary agencies and supporting agencies that support Infrastructure Systems RSS. Joe kind of gave you a little bit about myself, but let me give you a little bit more detail. I spent about 28 years as a military officer in the United States Army Corps of Engineers. 20 of it being a combat engineer and another 8 being on the construction side of the house working for USACE. So I have had a full depth and breadth of what the Corps of Engineers does on both the warfighter side of the house and also on the construction side of the house. After I retired in 2010, I took about a year off to take care of some medical issues, and then I came back to work for the Corps of Engineers as a DA civilian. I initially started off in G3, and I was doing disaster planning on the southwest border, looking at drug interdiction and interdicting folks coming over the southwest border. When Superstorm Sandy hit, I was moved immediately over to FEMA headquarters to assume the role as the National Coordinator for Infrastructure Systems. Infrastructure Systems, and you'll see it here in a little bit, and I'll go into a little bit more detail, is basically the job is herding the cats in the federal family, also developing teams in order to do recovery activities once you're called forward in the JFO. I assumed that role permanently January of 2013, and I still sit in this job now. What is the NDRF? Well, on the slides you can see in front of you, NDRF, what I want you to take away from it is a companion document for the National Response Framework. The National Response Framework talks specifically about all the activities that the interagency federal family, FEMA, included as basically the coordinating element for the federal family of doing response type activities. When you think about response, you think about, in medical terms, you think about triage. What you want to do is try to stop and save life and limbs from further damage when there is some type of accident. Think about it in those terms. It's the life-saving efforts that goes on for any type of community. When you want to talk about the recovery of under the NDRF, it is the actual physical therapy, the long-term, short-term, intermediate-term type of exercise you would do to recover that limb if you had a damaged limb, if you will. So it's the physical therapy. And the NDRF is a effective way to promote what recovery actually is. And we're not looking in the short term, we're looking in the long term. And it also, with the NDRF, it is only invoked through the Stafford Act. Go to the next slide, please. I want to give you guys a good idea of what are the critical infrastructure sectors that are involved in infrastructure systems itself. Because when you hear Infrastructure Systems RSS, that stands for Infrastructure Systems Recovery Support Function. Just like you have with the ESF, that stands for Emergency Support Functions. And the one that you're very familiar with is ESF3, which is Public Works and Engineering, and that's basically done in response. Infrastructure Systems RSF is done in recovery. And don't ever think it was specifically in usage that we're not tied to the hip with the ESF, just like the RSF. They're basically tied at the hip, and we're there from the very beginning, just like the ESF. When this response phase is going on, we're already engaged and starting to formulate in our plans what is the back part of recovery. But on this slide alone, I just wanted you to look at the different sectors in the federal government that we monitor on a 24/7, 365, mainly under the auspices of DHS, MPPD, IP, which is infrastructure protection. We monitor each one of these sectors: energy, water, wastewater, dams, manufacturing companies. You can see them all. That and based on the National Infrastructure Protection Plan, we started off with 18 infrastructure sectors, and we was reduced under PPD 21. Presidential Program Directive 21 from 18 to 16. Next slide, please. I want to give you a visual. What are the organizations that are supporting infrastructure systems recovery support function? As you can see, with the USAID's red castle, with the red our castle on there, we're the coordinating agency for this recovery support function. You'll hear the name RSF. That's what it stands for, recovery support function. And they're really, the chart shows they're only 4 primary agencies. We're considered part of those primary agencies, even though we're the coordinating agency for this RSF. And it's one other that we had to add to that, which is USDA rural development, because when you talk on water and wastewater, they come into play a lot of different places in a lot of different areas on various incidents that we've been involved in. And then you can see down at the bottom, there's some other supporting agencies that from time to time during different disasters that they may come into play as far as helping us assess the situation and also coming up with solutions for how we can do things better. Next slide, please. I want to also give you a visual of exactly in each individual infrastructure sector, who are the specific agency leads for each one of those sectors. For example, if you look down there where it says Department of Energy, that tells you for anything that talks about energy, whether it's electric, whether it's fuel, whether it's steam, whether it's nuclear, those guys are the leading edge of anything that supplies energy to our nation. Does that mean that we don't have folks in the Corps of Engineers who can actually address anything in the energy sector? No, that doesn't mean that, but that just means that they're the sector lead. Go to the next slide, please. Okay, if you look at the second set of slides, and I told you it was 16 on here, look at who is basically the sector lead for 9 of the 16 sectors. That says Department of Homeland Security. And if you look down there on the third one from the left where it says dams, you don't see Corps of Engineers anywhere. But it remains the fact that we're heavily involved in dams and levee across the United States, even though the sector lead is Department of Homeland Security. So you're now starting to get a feel for what each federal department and agency, that's why we call it the interagency up here, of who's actually leading certain sectors and who actually helps support the different sectors. Here in USAID, we support all the different sectors, infrastructure sectors. Next slide, please. Initially, when we were first starting to develop and formulate the NDRF, we had to give guidance out to the 9 that you know of, Corps of Engineer divisions, I'm sorry, and the 44 districts that support it. What we did was we developed an op order to respond to all hazards, which will also include recovery. You see response, but it also included recovery. We included an Annex Q, which addressed NDRF recovery type support from the national level all the way down to the local levels. And each subsequent year, we continued to use existing guidance that was in that original op order, but also supplemented based on lessons learned from Sandy and other type incidents we established where we were doing recovery activities. Make no mistake about it. During Sandy, that was the first time that we formally utilized a RSF, recovery support function, to do recovery type activities in New York and New Jersey. And since then, we have trained field coordinators before sending them out to that JFO, which is Joint Field Office, because we want to make sure that when they arrived there and they had to interact and coordinate with the Federal Disaster Recovery Coordinator, who was on the ground leading all recovery works, and he's appointed by the FEMA administrator. We wanted to make sure that when they arrived, that most of our people who got on the ground was not getting the fire hose effect. What do I mean by the fire hose effect? They're getting asked for things that they were not prepared to answer or do before they got there. Meaning that we, as in the Corps of Engineers, when we're sending those field coordinators out to those joint field offices, have to ensure that we know exactly what they're going to ask these folks for, and have prepared them to meet the demands of what's being asked of them. Lastly, is the management of the infrastructure systems RSF from the national level all the way down and regional all the way down to the local level to ensure we got the right person for doing the right things at the right time and having those necessary skills to be able to lead that type of diverse team that they will be leading. Next slide, please. Here's some commonalities of and in our regional contingency offices around the Corps of Engineers and their support to FEMA. There's no difference between when you have a mission assignment in response, and we're basically talking about what the mission assignments, team leaders and assistant team leaders versus the field coordinators. In recovery, when we send down an infrastructure systems RSF field coordinator, that person is on mission assignment funds, and it is totally not utilizing public PL 8499 funds. It is using funds from the direct disaster relief fund funding mechanism that's basically maintained by FEMA in order to ensure that we got the right people at the right time doing what we need to do, leading infrastructure systems type activities within the JFO. Unlike on the response with the ATLs and the TLs and the PRTs, right now the infrastructure systems RSF field coordinators and the supporting staff of SMEs from all of our primary agencies don't have any annual training, but that will soon change in the next coming year, because we're talking about to the headquarters about making sure we have the same training that ATLs and TLs have, we give our folks that's field coordinators that type of valuable training and skills each and every year to refresh their knowledge of what's the latest and greatest techniques each and every year. Next slide, please. This is just a white paper concept that I developed back in 2012, 2013 of how we needed to be organized to actually do the mission of recovery. You can see it, and it was an unconstrained estimate. It was a recovery liaison, the FEMA national coordinator, that's the slot I feel. Then you have a headquarters ISRSS program manager over at headquarters USACE and a deputy ISRSS program managers over USACE. Both of those positions right now are unfilled and have been unfilled since we have started the program. Then you also have a regional ISRSF program manager. Those positions are not filled at the region level at each division. But we have at least, as far as the ISRSS field coordinator / cadre, we have at least 35 of those. And they're geographically spaced around the country, supporting all 10 FEMA regions. So at the time when we was developing this white paper, at that time the director of contingency operation was Miss KDA. She looked at me and said, "Hey, look, we need to find a way of being able to support all 10 regions, but we just don't have the folks to do recovery full time." And up to this day, Back then, when that was 2013, 2014, we only had one person in Corps of Engineers doing recovery full time, and that was me. Now, within the last year and a half, we have got another one who is a subject matter expert as far as keeping the field coordinators trained and giving them the latest techniques, tactics, and procedures. And she resides up in North Atlantic Division Corps of Engineers. Her name is Hibber Haber. And we continue to update the annual guidance as far as what goes out as far as NDRF support in the JFOs, ensure that our divisions and districts understand what the requirements continue to be and what type of training we need to do to stay up on the various skills and tasks that we need them to perform. Next slide, please. This was the online training module that myself and our regional support center down in Mobile developed. We developed online modules that talked about those 6 topics that you see there: NDRF 101, public assistance, individual assistance, hazard mitigation. And the MSAR stands for Mission Scope and Assessment Report, and also Recovery Support Strategy. And the last one is Recovery Support Strategy Implementation. These are all the online modules that we went through EMI, which is the Emergency Management Institute that's run by FEMA, to make sure that we had the latest and greatest on public assistance, what functions are done under individual assistance, what's done under hazard mitigation. Then when you see that mission scope and assessment report and recovery support strategy, we showed them, all the field coordinators who went through that online training, we showed them what a good mission scope and assessment report looks like. That's when you're basically talking about what the situation was before the incident happened and all infrastructure, what it looked like then, the conditions on the ground. And then it talks about, okay, now, as you described that, what happened after the disaster, the incident happened. So what does the situation on the ground looks like after that? That's all described in that report. Then when you come to the recovery support strategy, it gives you solutions to the damages that you have had in all of those different infrastructure sectors. What is the short-term solution? What is the intermediate solution? And what's the long-term? Because anytime you're trying to do a long-term solution, and we're not talking about 3 to 6 months, you're talking 1 year to multiple years, up to 15 years. You'll see what I'm talking about in a couple of slides later. But it's looking for the long-term solution. A lot of times you have to have a strategy in order to get there. And I'm not just talking about a national strategy, but the state or region has to have a strategy in order to get themselves there. Next slide, please. Here's a listing of all the field coordinators within Infrastructure Systems RSS. You can see on there some in red, some in green, and some are in yellow. I was doing that because at the time we had 4 incidents going on. We had Harvey, we had Irma, we had Maria, and we also had the California wildfire. So, you know, these guys were getting tapped so often that I had to go to the red, green, amber, you know, as far as rotations, as far as who was next up in the chute in order to do this type mission. Go to the next slide, please. And that's the readiness pool that I developed based on the previous chart I just showed you with all the field coordinators on it. Next slide, please. Here's just an intro into the goals of the Infrastructure Systems RSS process. What I said earlier is we want to match the capabilities of infrastructure systems to a community's current and projected demand, meaning that however that environment, as far as any infrastructure sector, is currently built before disaster hits, we want to try to match that to either come back to their current design profile, or we want to take it to a virtual profile, meaning that we want to be able to project out 10 to 15 years with them of how they actually conceive themselves looking as far as any type of sector, infrastructure sector, within their state, within their region, on specifically Puerto Rico. How do you see yourself in 10 to 15 years? And then we've got to try to help them develop a strategy on how they get there. Next slide, please. Here's some of the tasks in Infrastructure Systems RSS that we try to do before any type of incident comes up in any given calendar year. And mainly during our busiest time is from 1 June of the calendar year until 30 November of that same year. That is the biggest peak time that we do anything, with the biggest peak months being August and September. But here's something for you as far as just the tasks. And the tasks that you see on this slide are mainly done at the national level. Because just like I told you before, we have a national coordinator. We don't have anybody in the region that's doing this on a daily basis. And we don't have anybody, because most of your field coordinators come out of the districts. We don't have anybody at the local level doing this on a daily basis because they're doing other jobs. Everybody you've seen on that list of field coordinators have a day job when there's not a disaster going on. Next slide, please. Here's some of the things that you do post-disaster. And you can see just from the first bullet is activation by the FDRC. That's the Federal Disaster Recovery Coordinator. That is the folks that the field coordinators work with once they get to the Joint Field Office, wherever that's designated within the state territory, or just like in Puerto Rico's case in San Juan. They get what really happens, and I don't want to belabor the point too much, is before we even get a mission of deploying a field coordinator, one of the first things that I would do is I'll talk directly to whoever the Federal Disaster Recovery Coordinator is and find out what is the not later than time you're expecting the activation of Infrastructure Systems RSS within that JF. What is the not later than time? When do our folks have to be on the ground? And so I immediately alert that division that says, okay, you have 6 field coordinators within your division spread throughout several districts. You get to pick who it is. I know all the names of who you have, but you get to pick because you better know how to manage your folks than I do. So then they come back and tell me, okay, this is the person we're selecting. And then I'll link them up with the FEMA mission support folks so they can start putting together the mission assignment, and they be able to give them all of their direct costs. Remember when I told you that the field coordinators, when they're not engaged in an incident or disaster, they have a daytime job? That means that when those guys negotiate that mission assignment, they're covering their weekly salaries, their base salaries, and they're also incorporating their TDY costs in there and all the incidentals for being a self-contained unit downrange doing what they need to do. So you can see, because that person is unplugged from his division or district, that means that person is no longer there doing the function they're doing. So FEMA picks up that cost through direct disaster relief funds. And these are some of just the other tasks, but the main one is deploy them, make sure they got the right resources, and make sure that we have a good mission assignment in place. Next slide, please. Here's a few more of the post-disaster infrastructure RSF activities, and see when I'm talking to you about the field coordinators. Now, when you look at that list, and you look at a Department of Transportation, a Department of Energy, Department of Homeland Security, National Protection, Program Protection Directorate, Infrastructure Protection. When you look at that organization, they also, along with USDA and EPA, they also have what we call subject matter experts that goes with that field coordinator and form the nucleus of what that RSF looks like. So just to go over that real quick again, you have a field coordinator, then you have subject matter experts from all of the primary agencies that are there on level 1 type disasters. And you might ask, what are level 1 type disasters? That's your Harveys, that's your Irmas, that's your Marias, that's your Superstorm Sandys, that's your Hurricane Katrina. Those are your level 1 type exercises. When it's a level 2 to level 4, we may ask for 1 or 2 of those primary agencies to go with that field coordinator. But in essence, what we're trying to do is within Infrastructure Systems RSF, we're trying to train all of the other primary agencies to be able to take the lead role in infrastructure systems if it is within their lane, if it's within their authorities, if it's within their statutes. USACE, just because we are the coordinating agencies, doesn't necessarily mean we have to lead it every time. We want those guys to feel comfortable when it is in the area of energy, in the area of transportation, in the area of EPA, that they step up to the plate and have their folks trained enough and have them geographically spaced like we do, so we can be a truly well combined element as far as infrastructure systems RSF. Next slide, please. This is what Joe talked about earlier, as far as you can see how from this chart, and I like to call this chart the money chart because it talks about the recovery continuum. And it's saying recovery continuum, but look what happens during the recovery continuum. You have the national response framework, which mainly focuses on response. And you also have the national disaster recovery framework, which is the area I'm in, but you see how they overlap. And all of it has to do with, when we talked about the pre-disaster, that goes to the preparedness of it all. And if you look at this chart, you see what I talked about earlier, when we come up with solutions doing that. When I said the recovery support strategy, we always come up with solutions in the short term, intermediate, and the long term. And the long term could be anywhere from 1 to 15 to 20 years. We're trying to come up with a solution for them and a strategy to help them get there. What may be some of the strategies may be like if you're building new roads and they don't get enough money through DOT, or they don't get enough money through FEMA in order to pay for all the adequate fixes for a road, they may have a temporary solution. We may say to them, hey, why don't you look at, if this is a primary road that gets you from point A to point B, look at, doing the work and utilizing tolls in order to pay for it. That type of thing. Those are the type of things, or bringing in private industry to help them supplement the funding that's needed, because private industry may be in the area also using those same roads. You follow me? Next slide. I think that should be it. So what are your questions at this time?
Todd, thank you very much. It's a very interesting rundown of how one agency, a very key agency I might add, ties into the national effort. What are your questions from everyone or from anyone about this, about the ties presentation, or how it all fits into the big picture? I'll pose one in the silence. Given the number of disasters that have happened in the last 2 years, has the role of the federal agencies evolved in any noticeable way? I mean, I would think repetition obviously makes things become a little more routine. That's not exactly what I'm getting at, but has the fact that there have been a number of hurricanes, and it's not just been hurricanes, there have been some tornadoes and some other internal flooding that have occurred in different parts of the U.S., as well as wildfires and mudslides. Have these range of disasters caused this framework to find new connections to make it be more effective, either the way the federal agencies work or the way the federal agencies work with the state and local entities?
I can say, Joe, that was a great question, because what we currently faced in Puerto Rico was totally different than what we did in Sandy versus the rains in North Carolina during Matthews, also during Michael and Florence. We went to a sector-based, FEMA went to a sector-based approach in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands because there was such significant damage. In the Infrastructure Systems RSF, you can see from our primary agencies, we were already set up to do a sector-based approach, because the various things that we had found over the first 2 years that we had formed Infrastructure Systems RSF, we found that through historical data from Sandy, from Katrina, was there were certain sectors that were damaged, highly damaged each and every time, which remained consistent. Those sectors was water, wastewater, energy, communications, and transportation. And now FEMA, through response, has now started designating those five sectors as the lifeblood of any community. We were there. We were in recovery and infrastructure systems RSS and our primary agency. We were there 3 years ago, already thinking that way. Because I mean, I learned that from the first administrator that I worked with over here at FEMA. Was there's one way a community dies. That community dies if the tax base, if the people who live there are no longer comfortable, no longer believe that the local municipalities can support their way of life as they saw it before the incident. So people usually leave areas like New Orleans or San Padre Island or whatever because they no longer believe that they can live there the way they want to live there because they're vulnerable. So if you go back and you make sure that you build resilience in the water, the wastewater, the communications, the transportations, and the energy sectors within those communities, you will be able to retain people because they know that you can do the functions that need to be in a short, intermediate, and long-term fashion. They know that you're focused on that those things are the lifeblood of that community.
Okay. Makes sense. Somebody else.
Joe, this is Albert. Hi, Ty. Thank you again for your presentation. It's an excellent discussion about the work that you're doing. The question that I have kind of ties a bit to Joe's comment in terms of the interface with not only the other federal agencies, but the state and locals, and also the private sector. Can you talk a little bit more about how the private sector is engaged in some of the work that you do directly? I know FEMA tries to engage the private sector as best as they can. How does the Corps with this program and FEMA coordinate that effort with private sector?
That's a great question, Albert. Very good question. Through DHS, MPPD IP, which is infrastructure protection, they are the owners and operators of all your physical security advisors, protective security advisors in all of our local and state communities. They know each one of them by name. They work for DHS. So, and those guys also know the owners and operators within each state. So if I go to any state and I go to a PSA, what they're called Protective Service Advisor, those guys can tell you the owners and operators, whether they're private or public, in each state. Take, for instance, Con Edison. We had a PSA up in New York who knew the owner and basically the group that runs Con Edison and could tell you and walk in there. And why is that really important? That's really important because we set up within infrastructure systems through DHS a council to make sure that when we had big time issues in any sector, that we can quickly bring not only the public sector but the private sector together to try to help solve those difficult issues when we're looking for solutions for putting back communities. Does that answer your question?
It sure does. Thank you very much, Ty.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that the Resilience Committee is trying to do is put together a speakers bureau for our local posts to turn to for people to talk about these topics. I would think getting a hold of those points of contact and making their contact information available through our website for posts across the country to find them to identify them so they invite them to the speakers at post luncheons and similar events might be a good idea. So we could talk about that later.
Okay.
Other questions? The other question that comes to mind for me is the shift that it's really anecdotal to me, but there does seem to be, even though there are more disasters, but in many places, the local or at least the state level is picking up a bigger share of the disaster response and in some cases the recovery. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Joe, I will disagree with what you just said.
Okay.
They're picking up the responsibility of actually doing it themselves, but the funding is still coming mainly from the federal government. And here's a case point. Up in Harvey, normally anytime you have a big debris mission that the Corps normally goes out and does for a state, what the people and the folks in Texas did was phenomenal, because they went out and hired folks who were out of work, whose property had been damaged, to go do debris level management, and they only brought in the Corps to do the advisory role in order to make sure that they can properly dispose of the debris in the right places and put it in the right landfill. The federal government is still continually to come up with with supplemental funding in order to fund when a state has really been impacted beyond their capacity. But the bottom line is they're using their own people within the state in order to do it, so making themselves home using their own folks, but also getting the technical advice from a lot of the primary agencies and the interagency. You follow me?
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, it's a great way. It's a great way of doing business, Joe, because you keeping that in house, and then when something else happens in Texas and something else happens in Florida, you got these folks that's already trained and ready to do this, and it also gives them another job classification and title to do something else that's really needed across the country.
Okay. All right. That's good. That's interesting. I had not heard it expressed that way before. That's good. All right. I think we probably need to move on to our next speaker. It's going to talk about the San Antonio Post. Ty, good presentation, good discussion. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, sir.
So, John, you on the line?
I'm right here. Appreciate you, Joe.
Yeah. So, John Inyart is going to talk to us about what San Antonio Post has done in the area of resilience within their post during 2017, and a little bit about 2018, I think, as well. So, John, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Appreciate that. As you can see, resilience director here at the San Antonio Post, and in that position for a while. I've spent 20 years in the Air Force as a civil engineer, time at the Air Staff, working incident management policy and bringing in compliance with HSPD 5, HSPD 8 within the Air Force, promoting that in a way that still an enduring aspect, even what we're trying to do here locally within San Antonio. And with my day job, working readiness from a different aspect, but always have a love for what we're looking for in resilience. So I'm going to give to you today is what we're doing in San Antonio, how we met the streamer requirements for 2017, a little bit about where we're trying to go to help improve that, enhance that. Next slide. So we'll just walk right down the streamer elements, and with the foot stomp I want to give you right up front is that the way we've built our resilient streamer, our program, our entire campaign is based on relationships. I'll emphasize that throughout the presentation. So with the first streamer here, the required aspect is to conduct significantly participate in an event focused on technology, tools, or best practices related to response, recovery, or adapting strategies for enhancing infrastructure resilience of local critical infrastructure. We reached out to our local power provider, Power and Gas, CPS, City Public Service, is the local entity, and in particular the Director of Compliance is who we brought on. And all we did was bring him into one of our regular meeting time slots and had a whole resiliency workshop during that particular July meeting that, again, is normally our slot for the lunch. And so it works just like a regular post meeting. They briefed on their critical infrastructure protection program, the hierarchy, the asset identification protection, and all the response and recovery actions that they do as an energy provider. And it's not just for the local municipality, it goes beyond the county, but arguably it's a large municipality as a base, and so they have over 4 million different customers, providers recipients rather, recipients. Great presentation when they went into and revealed a lot of the aspects, standards that they're looking at, especially the NERC. Many of you may be familiar with the North American Electric Reliability Corporation and the standards for critical infrastructure protection. The TPS folks walked down the 5 different tools that they use to protect the grid. And you can see them on the bottom of the slide there. And they brought their IT specialists. We got into a little bit of discussion, which was healthy for engineers to talk a little bit about IT security in open forum, what aspects they're bringing on board other than what we're familiar with in terms of infrastructure control systems. Again, this is applying that, but also going beyond just for to protect the grid, but also protect the customer base, customer information as it relates to. The second slide, or excuse me, the third slide, second element, required element, if you would. It reads, conduct, significantly participate in an event that is focused on technology tools, best practices, and improve infrastructure resilience in areas of energy, water, or cybersecurity. So here we asked for a presentation from the Air Force Civil Engineer Center. And they explained to us how at this time they are promoting it and basically rolling out a discontinued use of just the straight LEED facility certification, LEED silver, gold, platinum, like that we've used in the past, and focused mainly on unified facility criteria. And that's how we're going to monitor projects in the Air Force from this point on. Many of you may be familiar with UFCs. This one in particular, high performance and sustainable building requirements, this particular UFC. And the folks from AFCEC gave us a overview and plus the upcoming revisions that are going on with this UFC. And so by this relationship, we were able to hear firsthand how policy and program management is changing with the focus, even though it's still looking at the same aspects that LEED AP will be driving us towards in new facility construction or renovation. It's changing how it's being documented, how it's being enforced and promoted. The presentation, again, this is also at a separate workshop, a separate post-meeting earlier in the year, back in January. They also got into how facility commissioning, retro commissioning, will apply and be useful within the UFC. So great summary of where programs and policies are going. The other event that we organized was a tour of the San Antonio water system desalination plant down in South County. The desalination plant, along with combined underground storage facility, which uses a perched aquifer to store the water that they're producing in this desal plant. They're converting 12 million gallons a day of this brackish water, mixing into the aquifer at the site and then pumping it throughout the grid. So it's blended well within the system. And that was an excellent tour that we were able to get 32 individuals out towards. You also note on the slide there, we included in the streamer write-up that CPS presentation from element 1. We included that as it applies within this the same stream requirement number 2. With that, let's go on to the next element that we participated. So, desired element number 1. Again, that reads, engage local, regional stakeholders and members to identify high-risk threats to local community infrastructure and develop roadmaps for solutions. What we have is one of our members, named Doug Mabuki, who participates within what's called the Central Texas Regional Water Planning Group, Region L. And their task is to develop a regional water plan for their particular region, their particular planning area. So they're looking at water supply needs, and they're making the recommendations on how to manage their strategies to meet those particular needs. So Doug and his company, they're a sustaining member of our San Antonio Post, but he in his position, he's an enduring member of this particular water planning group. This particular team updates the plan every 5 years. They're right now working on the 2021 plan at this time. And he regularly attends the quarterly planning group meetings, activities, committees, and the like. And we also have another sustaining member who also assists SWCA Environmental. Is another of our sustaining members that we have a relationship with and has built a rapport with the water planning group. Let's go to the next slide for desired element number 2. So again, that reads, conduct or participate in an emergency preparedness or community resilience exercise with regional, state, or local organizations. So this particular group we focused with is the Texas State Guard. And it's different from the National Guard that most all you're familiar with. Most states have a State Guard association of some sort that's aligned with, but they're state-only agency. What we have is a number of our Resilience Committee and post members here at San Antonio within the engineer group, who is a key member, a key component of the Texas State Guard. Back in June, they participated in a unit training assembly for Response Team Alpha, and the goal of this particular assembly, this particular exercise, was to test the team's ability to provide A&E and facility management professionals, public works technicians, incident management operations support to not just the local jurisdictions, but also the state agencies, in particular the Texas Department of Emergency Management. And they do this through and along with the rest of the Texas military forces, meaning the rest of the guardsmen that we would be familiar with. And they do this particular team, Alpha, covers across all of South Central Texas. So just the note that we included was that the state agencies, local officials, they were definitely impressed, highly impressed with the host members, their expertise, and the breadth of experience. And it definitely came to bear that just months later, the team was well postured to be able to respond to Hurricane Harvey. The entire State Guard and the National Guard was all called out to Corpus and Houston. The focus was mainly for this particular team, drinking water, treatment plants, wastewater, sewage water plants, but they would report on a daily basis back to TDEM the status of the local drinking water production sites, which ones were compliant, which ones were on their way to compliance, and advising the local jurisdictions how they can get back up to recovery all the faster. And it was, let's just say, regrettably, but fortunately, very well timed. The team was well postured to be able to assist in Harvey, and they did that for about some 5 weeks, some up to I think 7 weeks duration. Again, so it's San Antonio Post members participating directly within the Guard, the State Guard. Desired element number 3, which reads the participate in at least one or more regional and national resilience educational events, the conference, seminar, webinar, and provide knowledge gain to the post members. And so what we did, we found a local event that met the bill. This was a San Antonio City sponsoring event called SA Climate Ready Planning for All, sponsored by the local university, ETSA, and City Public Service Energy. It's a industry education citizen workshop, and their focus was to build what they're calling a climate action plan. This action plan is to promote and to inform infrastructure, services, and just even routine actions within the city environs to understand where climate is now and where it's going, how it's becoming more variable in the future, and be able to respond to it proactively. So we got a draft out now. The final we expect in the spring, and includes a lot of public engagement. They're using, and this is some takeaways we found, they're using a lot of social media to engage us as their key tool for public engagement. What we did within the Post, we wrote, of course, newsletter article that we emailed out and posted on the website. And we emphasized a particular point that we found, that during the exchange, the takeaway was that local AE firms and construction companies, they do not have the experience with the newest sustainability applications and resilient technologies, be it with different green products, recycled products, different energy, particular HVAC controls technologies that are more sustainable, but they're so innovative, they're not well known, and looking for, they had to go well out of state to for local projects to get A&E firms that understood these particular sustainability technologies. For this particular element, we also included in the write-up the same Texas Guard engineering Team Alpha actions that they did in preparation for, in this case, Harvey. We also included them in this element 3. So in summary, I just want to emphasize what we're doing in San Antonio is building enduring relationships with federal agencies, state and even local, that are working or desiring action within the resilience environment. And it's through those relationships we've been able to be successful in, I would say, very timely, very impactful preparation and even response activities. But we want to be able to expand that. We're looking, especially within the Texas State Guard, to have a relationship that expands access of post members who don't necessarily have to join the Guard to still be able to be useful and use their expertise in preparedness, recovery, or response or recovery actions that we may find within South Central Texas. So that's what's happening within San Antonio. Any questions from the group?
Open the floor up. Comments?
John, a couple slides back, you'd mentioned that exercise issue. How did this San Antonio Post members, sustaining member firms, actually engage there?
Well, fair that the particular members were already members of the Texas State Guard. They haven't been members of both, and so that's the synergy that we have. We've promoted the Texas State Guard within post meetings in the past, and I've had some senior members from there join the Texas State Guard. And so that relationship is what's the key linkage that we have today. And we've had up to at least a half a dozen members of that Team Alpha I referenced. We also members of the San Antonio Post.
How does the Texas State Guard from our previous conversations differ slightly from, say, the Air National Guard in any other state or National Guard? It's a
fair point.
A unique
Go ahead, Gary.
Arrangement. Can you explain a little bit about how the Texas State Guard exists?
Well, fair point. And the fact that they're chartered, as we said, under the state, under the governor solely. They don't have a Title 10 role at all, and you can even say not a Title 32. There's nothing federal about them. Their charter is completely from within the state of Texas alone, and in particular so that they can be called up similarly, but they're treated differently administratively and otherwise. Though they do wear uniform, either Air Force or Army uniform, depending on their particular background that they came in with. Though we have a number of members who don't have any military past, they're still members of the Texas State Guard, especially from sustaining firms. So what we see, especially with this engineer group, it's not organized like you'd see a battalion, brigade, or the like. It's simply a group of engineers, about 34, I think, is the last number that on the rolls, that have a role to play in facility assessments throughout the routine times, performing exercises for damage assessment, and then when actual events happen, they go out and do the first call damage assessment alongside National Guardsmen. But they have expertise that can be applied specifically to certain problems, like what happened with Harvey, where they were used to advise local water purveyors on how to bring plants back as quick as possible, be it from redoing the filters, pumps, or even the power system to get back online, get compliant, producing viable water after Harvey. So it's unique. Not yes, I'm sorry. Yeah, the relationship is one that we have members that are part of both. The relationship within the Guard is that they're used alongside, but yet they're treated and organized differently to be used for their specialty, for the particular talent that they can bring to bear for the state.
Okay, so then bringing this home back to the SAME, it seems like a serendipitous relationship. How does the post foster or enhance the use your action metaphor to capitalize or build on that?
So we've had in years past, but well, at least once a year, especially if there's any particular member that we had from Texas State Guard, we allow the guardsmen to come to the post meetings in their uniform and give a particular presentation on what the Guard does. We send it out in newsletters and the like also more than once a year. Here's what the State Guard is doing, promoting within the San Antonio Post. So it's visible, it's live, and we encourage any member of the San Antonio Post who has an affinity for what the Texas State Guard can offer them, that opportunity to simply join. And the Texas Guard, on the other hand, does allow for even non-Guard members to come and join their assembly and participate even for one-time events that they're doing here local exercises. And we're looking to expand that to when they actually go out to Corpus or go out to Houston for different either events or exercises, that there's maybe an auxiliary relationship that we can establish and make it more official so that they can actually bring other San Antonio members, individuals and sustaining members, bring their talents out there. Because I mentioned it again, there's only about half a dozen that we've had at one time, and with the post here, we can bring a lot of different talent to bear on major exercises or major real-world events that can occur here in the area. So I would say it's a budding relationship. It's enduring for now, but it's still small, Gary. We would like to expand that and are engaged right now to explore those possibilities. Over.
Yeah, that's cool, John. I'm looking at, there's other states that have like a state emergency response team, and I'm looking here what we've fostered in Nebraska, where it behaves similarly to what you have more codified in the state or Texas State Guard. I guess it's a matter of finding that structure in our respective states.
Well, indeed, and ideally you have somebody within the post who already has that affinity. And if not, then it's a matter of an invitation, co-located meetings, and tours for either their facilities or a presentation from them to the post on what the different activities are. And so we've had both of those in the past, and I would encourage any post to explore that. Again, with the simple invitation of the State Guard Association to come down and just give a presentation of who they are and what kind of engineering concerns, capabilities that they have today, and what they're looking for needs for tomorrow. Thank you, Brett.
Okay. All right. Very interesting presentation. Sounds like y'all have a lot going on. And one of the things I would add is every post is different. Having read a lot of the streamer, I think I read almost every streamer submission, though I didn't evaluate each one. We spread that up among the committee. I read all of them. It was just amazing the diversity of approaches people had to resilience. And that brings us up to John, thank you very much for the presentation. It was very good. But that leads us up to the next item on our agenda as we wind it up. We got about 5 minutes left, and we'll close it out. So next slide, please. Maybe that was the last slide. I thought there was one more, but and that talks about the 2025 strategic plan for SAME. And really, what are we trying to do? What is the society trying to say is the purpose for resilience within its charge and its outcomes, and how's it trying to grasp this? And I tie it back to what we were just talking about, in that, having read the streamers, every post is doing something a little bit different, and I think that's great. I mean, I'm not one that says everybody needs to do something that's exactly the same. What we ought to be trying to do, I suppose, is trying to provide guidance so that we're all working together in some way to achieve some level of accomplishment, that we're not working at cross purposes. I don't believe we are, and that where our efforts are working sufficiently in concert so that we're achieving results that people can see how the results are making a difference. And I believe that the way that we can see that is getting back to the very beginning of our webinar, and I made reference before we got into Ty's presentation about how resilience, at least as the federal government has described it, and interestingly, I think that the folks who put the PPD 8 together really put a lot of thought into it. And I believe we can express it in a little more clear way, but nonetheless, the thinking is pretty sound, in that if you look at the range of things that we need to do to ensure that our communities, and that I also mean our military communities, are prepared to deal with disasters, whether they're man-made or they're natural. And that to do that, we have to have individual activities, and some of those are design activities, which are private interests. A lot of our sustaining members are very interested in, whether they are control systems for information technology, whether they're security systems, whether they have to do with location of buildings. We talk about landscape architects. These are individual activities that are tied to a particular project. Those are essential and they are necessary, and they are part of what SAME is all about. But that's also part of it. Then you get into the recovery operations, and those are being prepared in response, and it gets back to some of the comments we had at the end of Ty's presentation about the repetitive, I won't say repetitive nature, but the recurring nature we've had recently of lots of disasters, and how people have worked together more effectively through practice, unfortunately. But we respond, but it takes preparation to respond efficiently. So you take care of that, and then you look at the chart that Ty had at the end there, where you took up the recovery operations, and that's how you get back on your feet. And again, private industry is a big part of that, and that's a large part of what SAME has in its sustaining members. So you have a continuum across of all of these various things, and they represent, I believe, what SAME has always attempted to express, and they clearly represent what's reflected in SAME streamer submissions under resilience. Now, is the word resilience, does it represent immediately to everybody who uses that word that full spectrum of things? I believe that's where we get off track. I'm not sure that resilience is, quote, the best word. It's not the word that's used by the federal government. Resilience is actually a term that's used within those presidential policy directives. And that's one of the things that I'm suggesting that the committee consider is maybe there's a different phrase that we ought to use where resilience is a part of it. And just listening to John's presentation, that resilience is embedded in everything he did, or the San Antonio Post did, but maybe resilience is not the lead word, or maybe it is. I'm not sure. But everybody seems to have a little different way of looking at something when you tell them it has resilience embedded in it. And what we're trying to find is a clearer way to express this range of things, because I believe the range of things as we talk to many audiences, is what the membership of SAME is very interested in doing, and it seems very consistent with what SAME is trying and has tried to do. It's just that we're not very good at articulating what that really is, at least in that elevator speech that we're all familiar with to say what we're trying to do. Now, I have said a lot of words just now, and I'm really interested in your feedback on it. So I'm going to open up the telephone here and shut up for a minute and see what your thoughts are.
As John in here, I'll jump in. The questions we've always asked ourselves locally is, from where we're trying to go nationally, guided by the streamer, and where we're trying to get synergy locally, don't always merge up. We've been able to find ways to do that, but we've always talked about how to make the overarching simple and understandable, and yet relevant to the local. And this is especially true back when TISP was the focus, how to promote TISP, how to get the program out in front of the local jurisdiction. But to try to narrow it down to, here's the national vision, but locally, here's what we do that builds directly to that vision, has always been a struggle, a conversation. And we all want to see the streamer elements tied directly in that, where it's easy for any post to understand. Again, we try to do that here locally, but Joe, I think you're spot on with trying to bridge that gap between the big vision and just the day-to-day. Over.
Okay, thank you. Other thoughts?
Hey, it's Mike Pamplin. I'll just throw this out here, and I think you're right, Joe. I mean, everyone has a little bit different idea of what is resilience, and I mean, it's not just us, right? I mean, even at a kind of a national policy level, there's still a lot of talk about, what exactly is resilience, for instance, for DoD, or resilience when we talk about Homeland Security. I mean, I was at a brief the other day, and Homeland Security had historically focused on, the 16 critical sectors of infrastructure. And now, what they've realized is that, it's probably more important to talk about critical missions or critical functions, right? Such as the critical functions that I think our first speaker was talking about, water and communication and transportation. And I mean, there's 3 or 4 of them in there, electricity, of course, and power. So bottom line is, I mean, this is a big topic, and I don't think anybody really has the answer, which is why we get back to talking with, or encouraging our posts to kind of come up with their own answer, right? Because some of them are going to want to support maybe transportation resiliency because that's important for whatever community they're in, or I'm in Hampton Roads, right? And so certainly sea level rise and protecting the shoreline and from inundation from the sea. I mean, that's a resilience topic, and it's of a critical importance to Hampton Roads. But so is, I mean, we live in a military community, and so we start to talk about how can we as a society maybe support Department of Defense as they talk about mission assurance and ensuring and looking at critical energy as kind of a resilience topic. For instance, how do we ensure we have support to our bases for those critical functions that are important for projecting power overseas. So I mean, it's a huge topic, and so I don't think we need to get wrapped up in really defining it for the post. They have to be able to determine what is more important for them, what can they support within their region, what's important for them locally, and be relevant there. But I think providing a framework of, hey, this is what resilience is, kind of, I mean, it's about the ability to bounce back and mitigate and operate in a threat environment, whatever the threat environment is. So, take that and then apply it locally to your post.
Okay. That makes sense. Other thoughts?
This is Bob Cosarelli. I'm representing Suzanne DiGeronimo, and so I'm kind of like new to all this, what I'm hearing today. Absolutely fascinated by everyone's comments, just from a personal perspective. But speaking on the resilience topic, Suzanne did want me to deliver that the Army Corps of Engineers of New York District has just closed their public comment period of their harbor and tributary study. HATS is the acronym. Through Suzanne's position with the New York City Post, she represents the Post on the New York and New Jersey Storm Surge Working Group. And the group crafted a response which Suzanne is going to share with everyone. And also that the Storm Surge Working Group Chair, Malcolm Bowen, is a distinguished professor of oceanography at Stony Brook. He helped draft this 500 words note. And like I said, Suzanne will be sharing that with everyone. So I'm beginning to understand the fabric here of how these posts work. So like I said before, it is absolutely fascinating. So thank you for letting me speak today.
Sure. Thank you very much. That's interesting.
If anyone has comments you'd like to bring back to Suzanne, I'd be very happy to do that as well.
Okay. Any other input?
Yeah. Hey, Joe, this is Matt Rush in Denver. I wanted to just share a thought, and this may be more relevant to next year's JETSI speakers list, but I'm very much involved in the energy and water side of resilience, and I've worked across the federal agencies, including DoD, over the years. But the Energy Exchange, which was in Cleveland back in August, DOE FEMP rolled out a resilience planning roadmap that was pretty sophisticated, and I thought it really did capture a lot of the aspects of resilience that even go beyond, the broader implications beyond energy and water. And I thought with regards to DOE's leadership in funding this activity, they held a full-day workshop at the event with a lot of participation, mostly from government stakeholders and the labs. It might be interesting to get some participation from DOE in perhaps helping share and spread this resilience planning map, which is really designed for federal agencies and DoD to help evaluate, plan, and then implement resilience solutions, to really get there in a way that's going to be cost effective. Again, focused mostly on federal installations, but certainly of great value. I don't know if there's any awareness with this group of that product and of that planning roadmap, but it might be something that's pretty relevant and pretty unique because it does cut across the entire federal landscape, into local government and the municipal sector as well.
I'm not aware. Some others might. We also have an Energy and Sustainability Committee, and they may be aware. I'll check with them as well. We'll see if they happen to know.
Yeah, I doubt it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm involved in both, and it's certainly more strictly in the category of resilience. And it was put together with input from I think it was Pacific PNNL and some of the other labs. There's a contact at DOE that I could provide. His name is Kendall Cam. He's former NAVFAC Pacific. Is now in DC on that. But offline I could certainly help.
Yeah, if you could, that would be great.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, we're closing in on the end of our time. I want to thank everyone. If you have additional comments, you can always email them to me. My email, I think, is on some of the contact information. Or you can send them to Belle Febro, who I know was on the Outlook invitation. I want to encourage, if you would like to become an official member of our committee, and you're not, we have we very welcome you to. We would welcome you to join. But I want to thank you for your input. Remember that the deadline for the JETC call for papers is the 10th of December, and the streamer submission deadline is the end of January, the 31st. We look forward to receiving input for both. We hope that you'll consider joining us for JETC. And the last thing I've got is we're looking at another webinar in the latter part of January. This time it'll be on the JECO, which is the Joint Engineer Contingency Operations. That's another group within SAME, and each year they hold a contingency operation exercise. The last 3 years it's been in conjunction with the JETC. The last 2 years it's been on the New Madrid Fault as part of the national FEMA contingency operation. And we've asked the chair, Bill Haight, who is very interested in, well, I've asked him as part of the resilience perspective of it, how does that contingency operation, how does resilience play into it? And he's agreed to talk with us on a webinar about that kind of an operation. So that gets back to this continuum that we're talking about response and then recovery. And we also may get a chance to talk a little bit about specific design sorts of things based off of looking at how that operation operates, how design codes might ought to be modified if they're not already. So look forward to receiving an invitation sometime in the early part of December for that webinar, and we hope that you'll join us. And again, if you have any additional comments about the webinar, things we should change or don't do anymore, please let us know. So y'all have a great Thanksgiving. Thank you very much for your time, and have a great day.